I, female, 32, consider family to be super important. I've had a great relationship with my parents when I was growing up. However, my professional career demanded that I move from Milwaukee all the way to New Mexico, and visiting my family became super tough. It was fine in college because I could literally come over every weekend. But after graduating and being in a high pressure job, my relationship with my mom and dad became strained. They couldn't understand why I needed to move so far away and wanted me to prioritize them over my career and individuality. It was a new period in my life, and even though I wanted to continue to speak to my parents and support them however I could, the fact that I was so far definitely hurt them. My dad has a small business back home, and he always thought that he would pass it on to me, even though it's not really a field I'm interested in. Then, after I met my husband in New Mexico, things got a lot tougher for me. My hubby, Idris, male 29, is from California. And the life he's lived is very, very different from the life my parents have lived. And he has often been judgmental about their rural upbringing. Both of my parents were raised on farms before moving into the city. It was a massive issue for me, and I obviously told him it was a deal breaker. He has since worked on it and is now more understanding of the different kinds of lifestyles people have, but the damage between him and my parents was done. The first couple of times they met, Idris kind of snubbed their views and traditions, and that first impression left a lot of resentment between them. Since then, even though Idris doesn't have that judgmental attitude anymore, there wasn't a lot of closeness between them and any effort at building bridges, either from my husband or my family. Because of his lack of comfort every time we visited back home and my own rising workload, I haven't been home in 5 years. I did keep in touch online and through calls, but it's clearly not the same and was uncomfortable for my parents. This part is tough for me, but my mom passed away a short while ago. I've been a wreck ever since I got the phone call from my dad. It was a heart attack, completely sudden and with no previous signs of illness from my mom. I immediately took a sabbatical from work and decided that I would go over and stay with my dad in our family house for as long as needed. When I told Idris about my plans, his reaction was unexpected. He said that it was a bad idea to leave work like this without knowing when I'll be back. And he said that it would be difficult for me to adjust once I'm back there since I'm used to our life in New Mexico. I responded by saying that he was just assuming that I won't feel at home at my father's place. And well, my HR was completely okay with me taking leave for a set period of time and then doing work from home afterwards until I healed. So his claims were kind of stupid. It felt like he wanted to keep me with him and thought of my commitment to family and my commitment to him as a zero-sum game. I wanted to ask him to come with me and stay with my dad, but after his reaction, I no longer felt comfortable. I was troubled by his lack of empathy. And yes, I was seriously considering having a conversation with him about our relationship, but I didn't want to think about that at that moment. In that icy mood, I booked a ticket to Milwaukee, and from there, I traveled to our old family farm in Marquette County. After I landed and met Dad, we got into his car and got on I-94. We were talking about the family who were coming, the logistics of the funeral, and it felt nice to be back home. Dad looked terrible, and he was going through a lot, but still putting on a brave face. I know he was being strong for me, and all our friction about me going away was not even in his mind. That was until I got a call from my sister-in-law. Now, I don't really speak to Idris's family that often. They have the same kind of prejudices my husband had, but they never got rid of them. So I was quite surprised to see her name pop up on my phone. Before I could get a word in, my sister-in-law immediately started by saying, "OP, you need to get back to your husband. He's been hospitalized. I don't know what's happening, but I think it's serious." A lot of emotions went through my head, but the primary one was that I didn't want to not be there if my husband was close to death. I wasn't there for my mom, and I couldn't live with myself if I couldn't comfort someone who was important to me yet again. I explained what had happened to Dad and asked him if we could drive right back to the airport, where I'd try and figure out how to get back to New Mexico. Eventually, we ended up deciding to drive to Sawyer International instead of back to Milwaukee. On the drive there, I could tell that my dad was holding something in. And when I asked him what the matter was, he said, "It's nothing that can be helped, OP. I just wanted you here when we said goodbye to your mama. The funeral is in 2 days, and I don't think you'll be able to be back by then, but I understand that you need to be there for Idris. I'm not forcing you to stay here." I knew his feelings about his son-in-law, and yet he told me what he felt without trying to guilt-trip me into staying. I said goodbye tearfully and felt terrible that my first time back in 5 years was only for a few hours. During the flight, I was nervous and constantly texted my sister-in-law for more details, but she just gave me the location of the hospital and told me to come ASAP. When I landed and called her, she said that things are fine now, OP, but you should come home and speak to Idris. He's on bed rest. The situation immediately started feeling like it was blown out of proportion. I know, I feel terrible for thinking that. And when I got home, I found out that Idris just had a bad case of food poisoning. Despite the fact that he knew his diagnosis shortly after my sister-in-law called me, he decided that it was more important for me to come home and take care of him than be there at my mother's funeral. I saw red and chewed them both out. Idris and his sister were shocked at how angry I was, and I slept in the living room that night. The very next day, I flew back home exhausted. My husband thinks that I've abandoned him because he's still sick and his entire family is going against me. I genuinely do not care and don't think I'll be able to remain his wife, but I wanted to know whether I was the a-hole in my reaction. Update 1. I showed up at our family home and everyone was happy to see me, albeit a bit surprised. Nobody really knows the truth of what happened except my dad, since I didn't want to take away from celebrating Mom's memory. For all intents and purposes, Idris and I are okay, and I just came back because the health emergency was solved. In the meanwhile, I have had a few conversations with Idris on the phone, trying to understand his rationale as well as what exactly had happened. I now have the full story, and it honestly paints him in a terrible light. He started feeling really unwell just a little while after I left and called his sister, who happens to live nearby. She took him to the hospital, and by this point, he was in severe pain. The doctor offhandedly mentioned that it could be a ruptured appendix and might need surgery, and that's when my sister-in-law called me. I get that it wasn't her intention, but she made it seem insanely dangerous and didn't provide me with any details on purpose. I don't exactly know what she was thinking, but I'm willing to bet it was some kind of sick test. I know my husband didn't condone his sister's actions, but what happened afterwards is the real problem for me. After a few tests, it turns out to just be a really bad infection, which would go away with your usual set of antibiotics and rest. However, Idris thought that it would be better to wait for me to board the flight and come back to him and then tell me, in the hopes that I may decide to stay and take care of him. Obviously, it didn't work out like that, and he's realized that he was extremely stupid, and so was his sister. I don't even want to talk to him after knowing all of this, and I asked for some space so I could just focus on spending time with my family. Update 2. This sounds insane, but my husband called me and told me that he was in Milwaukee. I was shocked because he still sounded visibly unwell, and he doesn't even like spending time in Wisconsin. This happened a few days after my mom's funeral, and I wasn't expecting it. Dad and I were back in our home in Milwaukee, and I was planning on staying with him while we packed up Mom's stuff. Obviously, I couldn't leave my husband at the airport stranded. Even though I was mad at him, I picked him up and told him that although it was a nice gesture, it didn't excuse his behavior and the damage he had caused to me. I don't know why he thought that coming here would help fix things, especially considering how he'd be living under my dad's roof while the two of us are trying to deal with the loss of my mom. He stayed for a few days and we spoke civilly and decided that it would be in both our best interests to part ways. I don't begrudge Idris or hate him for the things he did, but it made me realize that we're very different in a lot of ways. We'll simply file for a no-fault divorce. There was also a prenup in place, so both of us will respect that. Update 3. Idris and I have ended our relationship and are currently living apart. I've completely moved back in with my dad while I look for a place in Milwaukee. My workplace has approved permanent work from home, and I'm realizing that I prefer living in Wisconsin more than New Mexico. My family is supporting me through the divorce, and while Idris is still a friend to me, his side of the family is extremely passive-aggressive and cold with me. Obviously, that's not an issue since I don't even need to speak to them out of obligation now. NTA, now that's straight up emotional manipulation. He had zero empathy and only thought about himself. NGL, Idris, and his family sound like condescending, entitled a-holes. It's easily NTA. Hope you find a better man. I can't imagine prioritizing family like you do and then having a man in your life who does the exact opposite. Next story. I'm 16, female. My mother, 40s, female, read in some parenting book that saying to your child, "I love you, but I don't like you," is a good way to discipline them. I don't necessarily agree with that parenting book because as a child, I viewed my mother liking me and loving me as the same. I used to have pretty bad attachment anxiety and would cry whenever she left me alone. And she would get tired of me and tell me, "Stop crying. When you act like this, I love you, but don't like you." Then she would be cold with me for the rest of the day. As far as I was concerned, what did it matter if she loved me if she refused to talk to me because she disliked me so much? Anyway, that's just backstory. The main crux of my issue is that my mother was playing with my younger brothers, 5 male and 2 male, and the 5-year-old asked why I wasn't playing. I had just returned from school and walked in right to hear his question, and my mother responded, "I don't think your sister loves me the way that you two do." I didn't realize it until that moment, but I had been mentally preparing to use my mother's statement back to her for my entire life. I responded, "Mom, of course I love you, but I don't like you." Then I remembered why I've never used that phrase. My mother got really angry at me. She got up and went to her bedroom, and then she was very cold with me the rest of the day. The only thing she said to me is she told me to not tell my father about any of this because if he hears, he'll get angry at both of us for fighting and will just cause a bigger scene. I really feel badly for my brothers because they were confused. Apparently, my mother never used that term on them. They were also upset because the play session got cut short, and I feel badly because I could have just been nicer to my mother. AITA for responding how I did. The way I use it is, "I love you very much. I do not want to play Legos with you right now because you just threw a stuffed dog at my head. That hurt my feelings, and I need to take a minute. That was not a nice thing to do. I love you. See you in 5 minutes." My kid can be an a-hole sometimes, as can everyone. That doesn't make me love her any less. It just means I need a few things. 1, understand that I love her and there is nothing she could do to change that. I love you very much. 2, what she did and why that was a dick move. Threw a stuffed animal at my head, which is not nice. 3, how that impacts other people. It hurt my feelings. 4, the natural consequences of that impact. I don't want to play right now, and I'll be ready to play again in 5 minutes after I calm down. As a parent, you have a relationship with your child that includes teaching them how to behave in a respectful and kind manner. Most kids are born damn near feral, and you have to correct the behaviors that could harm other people physically and emotionally. This also means teaching them what parts of other people's responses are their responsibility. My child is responsible for throwing a toy at my head and hurting my feelings. She is responsible for apologizing for her actions and asking how she can help. Grab an ice pack, help mop up, whatever is age appropriate and related to her actions. She is not responsible for regulating my emotions. She is responsible for letting me do that for myself. She doesn't have to fix my hurt feelings. She does have to let me take a moment to fix them myself. I wonder how old that book is. I'm an older adult, and my mom used to say almost the exact same thing to me. I love you because you're my child, but I don't like you as a person. Such a rotten thing to say to a child. I'm sorry your mom said this to you. Having kids myself, I have modified the statement to I love you and I always will. That won't change. I do not like how you are behaving right now. And then I'll tell them the behavior that is inappropriate. My mom didn't like it when I used that phrase back on her either. My advice to you is to just be happy with who you are. If you aren't happy with some part of yourself, improve it for you, not anyone else. Don't spend your life trying to make someone who doesn't like you happy. Find peace within yourself and be the person that you like and want to be. If you are happy with the person that stares back at you when you look in the mirror, that's all that matters. NTA. Next story. I, 40s male, get Chinese takeout most every Friday night with my wife, 40s female. It's her favorite food, and the tradition started when we were first dating. It continues to this day as a way for us to make time and appreciate the little things with one another. We usually order after our two younger ones, 7 and 10, are in bed. Our oldest is 14 and does his own thing most of the time on weekend nights, usually staying in his room. It isn't a secret that we do this. We often have a few leftovers, usually a few dumplings or crab rangoon, that we let the kids snack on. Lately, my kids have asked to get Chinese with us. Every once in a while, we'll order for them as well as a treat. However, they are requesting that they be included every time. It's an extra $15 to $20 a week for our children to eat, so that's why it's an occasion for them. Plus, I enjoy having a special night with just my wife. Chinese takeout also isn't the healthiest food, and I would rather not have my kids eating it regularly, even though I do. They are well fed every other night of the week, and their grandparents take them out to eat when they spend the night, usually once or twice a month. My parents like having the kids over. So it's not like they never ever eat at restaurants. When my oldest asked and the other two expressed their desire to join in, I explained that this is something special between their mom and I. It's like a date for us. They whined a bit, so I offered a compromise. We will include them more often, once a month rather than every few months. That way, they still get to be included and we still have our tradition. They objected, but I reminded them that this is a compromise and I don't have to include them at all. They then accepted the deal and got included tonight. My wife thinks I'm being a bit harsh, that it isn't that much extra to include them. I said it isn't necessarily about the cost, but the fact that I enjoy having time that's just her and I. She still thinks we should just include our kids. AITA? Oh, I sort of was thinking like the kids have to eat dinner on Fridays anyway, and stuff like nuggets or pizza are cheap and can be not takeaway. Sorry, my brain is. It's definitely something. I'm sure there's a word for it like not takeaway, but still junko, funner food. I'm very tired. So Just use whatever Friday's regular dinner budget is to have a better meal. Dinner for 3 kids might cost XYZ regularly. Just allocate that for the cost of the kids' dinner and let the kids know the parameters of what they can choose. It could even be like parents have Fridays, kids have Tuesday pizzas because the local place does 2 for 1. If the children feel left out, create something within the current resource system that is a kids only treat to show them the value of recognizing and appreciating that within larger social groups and smaller bonds exist, and that those bonds are not a threat to the group as a whole, while also showing them you view them as people, and finding a way to facilitate regular whole group time for their request for inclusion may suggest they are wanting. My understanding from the post is that they're whining about not getting it, not because of the food itself, but because they're not getting to join in with their parents. It's healthy and important to a relationship for a couple to have time to themselves away from their children, and for children to learn that they're not always going to get their way. OP did mention that it happens while the younger children are asleep and extended a reasonable compromise that lets them join in on the tradition while getting to keep it to himself and his wife on other nights. So they're not totally shut out from it. I think it would be helpful if OP explained to his oldest that the meals are dates between him and his wife, and the oldest is old enough that he should be able to understand that that's the significant part of the tradition, and that his parents deserve that special bonding time. And for what it's worth, the kids are otherwise being fed well and get to go out to restaurants, so it doesn't sound like they're being deprived. Also, I don't want to attribute this sentiment to you since I don't know if you intended it, but the phrasing habitual exclusion under the guise of a date comes across as presumptive that OP is denying his children inclusion in his dates out of malice. Exclusion is not inherently a bad thing. Right. It is important for couples with children to have these date nights to help keep the relationship and their mental health strong. Just because people have kids does not mean the kids have to be included in every aspect of their lives. My husband and I don't have a lot of babysitter options, so we have date night in the house. We tell our girls that we're going to have a date night, and to them, 9 and 12, this means they are having a sister's night the same night. For them, we make a charcuterie board or whatever we call pickies. This is their favorite meal. And they get to eat upstairs in the playroom and watch a movie. We usually get something sweet for them as well, like Haribo gummies or something that does not require parental involvement. Husband and I will sometimes order and sometimes cook. Either way, the kids are not invited to our meal and we are not invited to theirs. We have done this for about 5 years now, and neither party has ever complained. Stay tuned for more stories from our girl relationships.